I'm going to, in the meantime, introduce Eboo Patel, who is joining us today. He's a great partner in this work, a friend of Convergence, and a leader in the fields of bridging, interfaith, and engagement of youth and other audiences. Many of you, I'm sure, know him and or know of him. Eboo is an author, speaker, educator, interfaith leader who founded Interfaith Youth Core based on the idea that religion should be a bridge of cooperation rather than a barrier of division. And I've gotten to know Eboo over the years, and especially over the last several months. And Convergence and Interfaith Youth Core are now partnering on several important initiatives. We're partnering around the digital disinformation dialogue to ensure that we're actually extending the dialogue to groups of faith-based leaders who are able to share and offer feedback around how digital disinformation affects their communities. As I mentioned, we're partnered in supporting Representative Kilmer and advancing his bill. We're partnered on a set of work with the Fetzer Foundation to study aspects of Convergence's methodology and understand which of those aspects would be most appealing within the spiritual and faith-based communities so that we can be engaging more of those organizations in doing this work. And Eboo and I are also working together on a national service convening that we'll be having in the beginning of April to discuss with other leaders the connections between service work and bridging work. And I just finally want to note we have some wonderful community overlap. I'm so proud to share that that Tony Clark, a supporter of Convergence, participant with our leadership council, has been announced as the incoming board chair of Interfaith Youth Core. And I'm also delighted to share that as we're gathering today, Eboo has a book which will be coming out in May, and which will address many of the pieces of work that we're currently considering. This leadership council meeting is the first public speaking that Eboo is doing around this book, and so I expect to pepper him with questions about what he's hoping will happen as a result of the book and what he wanted to make sure comes away from the book. With that, Eboo, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. And let me just say just how much fun it is to work with David and his team. I attached myself to David's hip, and I'm not letting go. We are taking DC by storm and lots of other places. And look, this is an organization that started in strength with the exceptional Rob Firsch, who my friend Akib Ahmed introduced me to, 10, 12, 15 years ago, and is growing from that strength with the leadership of David and his staff, and my friend and colleague and mentor and boss, Tony Clark, the incoming board chair of IFYC. So it is terrific to be building the bridge building field with you, David, and with Convergence.
Thanks so much, Eboo. Right back at you. So Eboo, let's start off. When you look at this space we're in and the moment we're in, and you think about Convergence, and you think about IFYC, and you consider the book that you're releasing, I would love for you to just share your perspective on where we are, what's happening in this moment, and if you would especially how is the book also going to be addressing this moment?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks so much. So for centuries, people thought that diverse democracies were impossible. I want to underscore that, right? So the nation in which we live and inherit, right? People thought was impossible. For forever, people thought that the only way to have a democracy was with a homogenous population. And the first entity to prove different was the United States of America, imperfect as it is. And we are learning, actually, generation over generation learns that it needs to be rebuilt and strengthened. It cannot simply be taken for granted. And one of the ways that it is rebuilt and strengthened is by this commitment, not just to shake our fists at the things we do not like, but to build the things that we do, to build the inclusive institutions that we think are better. And so the book We Need to Build is really about not how do we have a more ferocious revolution, but how do we build a more beautiful social order? And how do we take our signal from Jane Addams, from Geoffrey Canada, from Brian Stevenson, from people who have built institutions that are bright spots and say, here is how you do this. IFYC becoming, I will let you know a little secret, becoming, renaming ourselves Interfaith America in about 6 weeks. We are seeking to do this with special attention to religious diversity. For centuries, people thought that the identity that would most rip a nation apart was religious identity. If you wanted a democracy, you had to have all Christians or all Muslims or all Jews. Again, the United States of America is the first nation to prove that you can actually have a religiously diverse democracy. We are now far more religiously diverse than we were in the 17th or 18th or 19th or 20th centuries. We are not a Judeo-Christian nation anymore. We are Interfaith America, and how you have a country in which people who orient around religion differently, who have very different views of God, are still treating cancer patients together in hospitals, are still teaching together in schools, are still coaching kids together in Little League. That's the challenge that we have taken specifically upon us at Interfaith America.
Eboo, draw the dots that connect the interfaith bridging with political or ideological bridging. Do you see them as basically the same, or are they analogous, or does one contribute to the other in specific ways?
Not necessarily. So we think that religious identity is not more important than race or gender or sexuality or geography, but it's not less important. So I want to give you a kind of an interesting thought experiment. When you walk into a room and you kind of have in your mind the map of diversity, right? You think to yourself, is this a diverse space? You think, are there Black folks and white folks? Are there Northerners and Southerners? Are there gay folks and straight folks? Are there men and women? Are there Democrats and Republicans? We want you to also be thinking to yourself, are there Muslims and Jews? Are there atheists and evangelicals? Are there Buddhists and Jains? In other words, why shouldn't religious identity be a co-equal dimension of diversity, just as every other one, right? Why are we saying that? Number one, the United States, for a Western nation, is uniquely religiously devout. We have higher levels of prayer, we have higher levels of worship attendance, we have higher levels of people who say they believe in God than virtually any other Western nation. Religion really matters to a segment of Americans. So if race really matters, if gender matters, if sexuality matters, it deserves to be at the table. Religion matters, it deserves to be at the table. That's number one. Number two, religion plays a unique role in American civil society. Another thought experiment. Imagine for a moment, every institution started by a faith community in your neighborhood disappeared. It's not just the churches and synagogues and mosques that are gone. It's the preschools. It's the social service centers. It's the places that help folks with adoptions. It's the hospitals and colleges and law schools, right? Robert Putnam says that something like 50% of American civil society is contributed by diverse faith communities. So if those institutions are not at the table through some kind of representation, what are we doing? What are we doing? And I'll add two other things which I think are worth noting. Our American law actually has a preference for religious identity. Religious identity is noted in the First Amendment of the Constitution. Religious identity was in the first, right, freedom of religion and the separation of church and state, right? It was reaffirmed in the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1994, reaffirmed dozens and dozens of times by the Supreme Court. If you go to court and say, my religion will not allow me to do this, there's a reasonable chance you win. Agree or disagree, it's just a fact. It is just a fact of American life. And so if we are not paying attention to religious identity and diversity in our civic enterprises and in our law and the legal system, it is actually the dimension of identity that is preferenced. There's a misalignment. And the final thing that I'll say is, for centuries, the United States has understood itself in religious language. Beloved community, cathedral of humanity, city on a hill, better angels of our nature, almost chosen people.
In God we trust.
In God we trust, right? And the fact that that language has been the binding narrative of a strikingly diverse democracy, that should make us pay attention, right? John Winthrop uses city on a hill in 1630. Barack Obama uses city on a hill in the early 2000s. It's lasted for 400 years through very different kinds of figures, and it has served, it's expanded, it has served as a way for us to understand ourselves. We should pay attention.
Eboo, before jumping directly into the book, would you tell us a little bit about the bill that was mentioned a couple of times, your sense on what it is and its importance in this moment?
Absolutely. So this is actually the hard work of my friend and colleague, Mary Ellen Geis, who said, let's see if we can work on something legislatively. The big idea here is that within the federal government, there should be effective and efficient methods of convening the bridging community, like this civic movement, David, that you are a leader in and Convergence is a leader in, and we play our own role in at Interfaith America, et cetera, this growing civic movement. There ought to be a space in the federal government that convenes it, that raises the visibility and discourse of it, that trains people within the federal government to be excellent at it with the skills and knowledge base of bridge building, and that contributes to the research base around it. And I should say, there is a growing research literature on bridge building and popular literature, right? From Amy Chuao's Political Tribes to Ezra Klein's Why We're Polarized, to Liliana Mason's Uncivil War, to Amanda Ripley's wonderful High Conflict. Lots and lots of smart people are saying, hey, look, there are things we can learn when we dive into high conflict, and there are ways to get out of it, right? And so part of what this federal office would do, similar to the U.S. Institute of Peace, which we at Interfaith at IFYC worked with a lot in the early 2000s, it would raise the visibility, it would convene the field, it would train a set of bridge builders, it would contribute to the research base, and crucially, it would give out mini grants to local bridge building efforts. Why shouldn't bridge building be as widespread as YMCAs? Why shouldn't bridge building be as widespread as Rotary clubs? Why shouldn't bridge building be as widespread as Little Leagues, right? Little bridge building spaces everywhere. And if this is a national priority, our government should play a role.
It's been really uh, remarkable watching you and Ellen in the space working with Congressman Kilmer. I've been privileged to be connected in some of those conversations, and to see that Congressman Kilmer was successful in bringing 9 Republicans from really across the diversity of the Republican group in the House, that he's the co-sponsors of the bill. And it feels like the conversation about the bill among the bridging community and in local, the local landscape is really productive. And I've had an opportunity, even though Convergence doesn't specifically take positions on pieces of legislation, just the opportunity to name what a boon it is that that there's a new kind of conversation happening around bridging and the role of government is really profound. And so, Eboo, I really hope you maintain the focus here, and we're ready to be helpful and supportive there.
So, let me just say, David, you've been more than, I mean, I'm the bystander here, right? I'm the guy who's got a wagon and I'm hitching it to your trains. But I have to say, there's no this is Mary Ellen's project. Thank you, Mary Ellen. And David Eisner is on speed dial at 10 o'clock at night. And that's actually not a metaphor. That's, hey, we need to run this trap. Who can help us with this? And David's been there, right? It's a big deal that David was the CEO of the Corporation for National and Community Service and ran the National Constitution Center, et cetera. So thank you, David, for believing this is important and helping navigate its way through. And thank you, Mary Ellen, for being a headlight on the northbound train. And anybody who catches the Grateful Dead reference, +1 to you.
Thanks for the Grateful Dead reference. Tell us what are the most important things that you're hoping readers of the book will take away? And I'll say that knowing that you're not going to be able to spoil reading of the book that way, because I've already read several elements of it, and it's really terrific.
I appreciate that. And we're going to, Ducey and the terrific Convergence team, and just thank you all for what you do. Just an exceptional civil society staff. They're going to circulate the introduction after this, so people will be able to get a little bit of a taste. And there's a pre-order form part of that if you're interested in pre-ordering the book. So I'll give you one of the early stories in the book. So when I was getting involved in activism in college, and developing my voice, so to speak, I would say most of my voice was used to tell other people what they were doing wrong. And that's, there's a use to that. It was certainly empowering to be a 19 or a 20-year-old who was, calling folks out. And not long after I graduated from college, I got had a moment in which I was taken really seriously. And here was that moment. So I'm at an interfaith conference. This is June of 1998. It's a conference of the United Religions Initiative at Stanford, California. I have become very enamored of faith-based activism. And 12 or 18 months prior, was deeply struck by the stories of Dorothy Day and Bayard Rustin, et cetera, people who, frankly, they loved people more than they hated the system. And their social activism came out of that love for people. And oftentimes, of course, that love was anchored in a love for God, right? So I'm kind of following the path here, and I wind up at this interfaith conference, and I go looking for heat-seeking social action. And what I find is senior theologians talking. And, it frustrates me. I'm 22, 23 at the time. And I stand up from the floor of this conference and I shake my fist and I say, you all are too boring and you're too basically you're too boring, right? And I came looking for people on the front end of social action, and here you are with your fancy degrees and your colorful hats talking, right? And there's this kind of, there's this applause in the room, and I'm actually accustomed to that kind of applause. I'm accustomed to having my critique commended. And afterwards, I'm feeling pretty good about myself. And this woman named Yolan Trevino walks up to me and she says, what you said there, interesting, that interfaith work these days is too many senior theologians talking. And what interfaith work ought to be is a radical diversity of young people acting. You should build that. Whoa. Now that's being taken seriously, right? Being taken seriously is not, hey, you're so good at telling other people what they're doing wrong. It's, hey, you have the vision and the knowledge and the skills and the gifts to show us what right looks like. And that kind of knocked me on my seat. And I've really spent the last 25 years, since 1998, responding to that challenge. And the thing that strikes me about that moment is she said it so graciously. She was basically like, I believe you can do this. It wasn't like, sit down, kid. Like, unless you can do something, you don't get a voice. She was like, boy, you seem impressive. You could do this. You should do it. If you think it's important, why would you let anybody else do it? Right? And I actually think that that's a lot of what is good about America. I mean, somebody built the Mayo Clinic. Somebody was like, we ought to have a better way of doing medicine. I'm not going to go tell other people how to do it. I'm going to do it. The Mayo family and the Sisters of St. Francis in Rochester, Minnesota were like, we're going to build something, right? My friend Rami Nashashibi is like, why is it that on the southwest side of Chicago, the only place where you can get food is at a liquor store? Okay, I'm going to build a different kind of corner store. And we're going to have fresh food in here. And they just put it up called Fresh Market, right? So this is a story of institution building as an approach to social change and a vision of a diverse democracy that is made up of better institutions. An approach that says we defeat the things we do not love by building the things we do. There's, I think, a lot of hope in the book, a lot of we can do it in the book, and there's a little bit of an edge, right? Like, be careful ripping the pilot out of the cockpit, because the people on board will expect you to fly the plane.
That's sort of analogous to the Colin Powell's recitation of the Pottery Barn rule. If you break it, you own it.
Yeah.
If you were to answer a couple of questions in the chat, and I'll say two, because I think that they're probably related. Rachel first says, it seems like religion is often invoked by some of the people who are most stringently opposed to actively diversifying American society. How do you come to terms with that? And do you have ideas on how to reach those people? The second question, which I think is related, by Anita Chandramahan, is how do you recommend reconciling faith-based driven values and priorities in conversations with others who don't ascribe to or hold those same motivations?
Great questions. So if I'm a bridge builder, I have taken on the challenge of identifying common ground and opportunities for cooperation with you, right? If I call myself a heart surgeon, my job is to operate in people's hearts. If I call myself a bridge builder, it is my job to find ways to cooperate with you. It is not principally your job, right? Like, I have taken on the identity as a bridge builder. So with rare exception, Nazis are an exception, I am looking for a way to cooperate with you. I'll give you an example of this, but there's a million examples, but here's a prosaic one, which is inspiring to me. So Cornel West is on Book TV, I don't know, like 15 years ago. And somebody dials in and says, hey, I disagree with all of your politics, A to Z, top to bottom. Can't stand them, but I love jazz. And Cornel West says, let's talk about Miles and Coltrane, right? I am going to find the place in which I can engage with you positively, and I'm going to engage there. And if that's it, if that's the only, if the only thing that Cornel West could do with that guy who called in was talk about jazz, keep talking about jazz. But my wild guess is there's probably more. So you start with the place in which you agree. And if you're the bridge builder, it's incumbent upon you to find it, right? When Prime Minister Zelensky talks to the British Parliament, he invokes Winston Churchill. When Prime Minister Zelensky talks to the US Congress, he invokes Martin Luther King Jr. He is finding the place that resonates with his audience, right? So I just think that's, it is the heroes of the bridge builders. The challenge is to find a place to cooperate. And I'm not looking for ways to disagree with you. I am looking for ways to positively engage you. It's my challenge.
So interesting, Eboo. It reminds me of a podcast that I listened to from Common Ground Committee. And I commend those podcasts, including the ones that are on partnering with Convergence. But I think it was Daryl Davis who in this podcast talked about, he's a jazz pianist, and he uses his love of music as a way to connect with Ku Klux Klan members. And he's an African American, and it's been a very, very powerful and successful way for him to be engaging. And so it sounds like this discussion that you're quoting from 15 years ago is leaning in the same direction.
And this is Tony Clark has a great organization called I Build Bridges, and arts is the language, right? So I think the point here is you find something. It can be sports, it can be arts, it can be we care about this school and we're going to do and we're on the PTA together, and whatever else we disagree on, we're gonna work together to improve this school. But you find something, and I think the thing that I really want to emphasize is if you take on the title bridge builder, it is your job to find it within the realm of reason. Like, I'm not buying a brownie from the KKK bake sale, but I am looking for ways to positively engage with everybody else. I'm going to say one more thing, right? Which is we live in a society that in its discourse, it discourages this. But in the warp and woof of the civil society, it actually facilitates this in invisible but profound ways. So let me give you just an everyday example, right? Probably something that people can relate to if just pay attention to this in your life. So I'm out west with my family over the summer. We're vacationing in Oregon, and there are wildfires on 3 sides of us. Okay. And like to the point where when there's wind from anywhere, it's hard to breathe. And I am thinking to myself, there are people who think I am going to hell, who think the way I voted is evil, who disagree with me on everything, who have strapped up and are risking their lives to fight these fires. Like my survival depends on these people who are doing that. And my guess is there's easier way of earning $25 an hour than doing that, right? And if you just think about that for a second, right? Like who does your life depend upon? who you profoundly disagree with, right? If if I got hit by a bus and I walked out my door, I'd be taken to a hospital, and I'm not asking the surgeon who she voted for. Nobody does, right? Do we really want a society in which we do? Because there are those societies, and I think we should remember that, right? There
Yeah.
are most places over the course of human history have been organized around narrow identity communities. We have a society that is actually based on cross-cutting principles. Now, it's not perfect, but we have a chance to make it better. And it's a lot better than other places. I think about Obama, at Howard University, giving the commencement in 2016. And he says, hey, listen, we're not a perfect union, but I'm curious, where else would you prefer to have been born? What time and place? What time and place? Right? And I think to myself, like, man, I get America to improve. I won the lottery, right? A bunch of people in Ukraine would give everything they had to be like, oh yeah, I get to improve America. I get to improve America, this place.
Makes a lot of sense, Eboo. To this idea of the opportunity to improve America, that's an opportunity that I know IFYC takes very seriously, Convergence takes seriously. Do you have advice or based on your experience with the work, what do you think Convergence might lean into in a greater way, or where do you feel like we're leaning in and should keep doing so in order for us to have the most profound impact?
So, I mean, I think you guys are doing so many things right. So part of what I want to do is just list the things that I think you're doing right. I think that every fold and layer of the organization should be telling the story of the miracle of diverse democracy. America is an impossible country. It is impossible, right? People thought it couldn't happen. You could not have a diverse democracy. And yet here we are, right? And so to tell the story of, wow, we live in a nation where people from the four corners of the earth who pray to God in different ways, including not at all, have come to the same patch of land and built out of it a country. And nobody thought it was possible, right? And because it is such a miracle, here's the work I'm willing to do. I am willing to proactively engage positively with people with whom I disagree. I'm willing to imagine the cooperative engagement and relationship, and I'm willing to do the work for it. And every chance I get, I'm going to tell the story of it. I'm going to talk about the heart surgeons who voted differently, who just saved a life. I'm going to talk about the firefighters who think that I'm not going to heaven with them, who are risking their lives to fight fires for me. I'm going to talk about the Little League coaches who think differently about the Middle East and are making sure that their kids get the best experience they can out of Little League, right? So every fold and layer of the organization should be telling the story of the miracle of diverse democracy and the work we have to do to continue with that miracle. And then I think in the kind of professional layers of the organization, David, the full-time staff, you and your terrific team, you continue to do the very specific projects around gun issues, around digital disinformation, right? Like that takes full-time work and a very honed skill set. So the whole organization can be telling the story. The whole organization can be telling the story, right? And you can train people to do that, right? I mean, we love quoting John Courtney Murray at Interfaith America, the great Jesuit philosopher who said, the definition of civilization is living together and talking together. And the definition of the barbarian is the person who destroys the conversation. That's what a barbarian is, the person who destroys the conversation. And the only way you have a diverse democracy is if people of different identities and divergent ideologies work together to build the underlying community, right? you work together to build the underlying community. So I think you guys are doing everything right. As much as you can, amplify the story, because we have lived for at least 5 years in the story of us versus them. And we need to tell the story of bridges and not divides. We need to tell the story of just us, and then continue to find those pockets that require the professional excellence that you and your team just exude.
Thanks, Eboo. Can you reshare who was the source you quoted about saying that that barbarians are those who interrupt the conversation?
John Courtney Murray, early 20th century Jesuit philosopher, hugely influential in Vatican II. It's in a book called We Hold These Truths.
It's beautiful. I'll borrow that. We got a question a little bit earlier. We're getting close on time. A question a little bit earlier about from Debbie Lynn Molyneux. How do we think about measuring progress around religious diversity?
So we've developed this thing at IFYC called the Interfaith Triangle, and it's derived from a set of research-based and quantitative surveys, and it's basically attitudes, relationships, knowledge. And what we know is that increased appreciative knowledge about people from another religion improves people's attitudes and facilitates better relationships. Better relationships inclines people towards learning appreciative knowledge and improves attitudes. A better attitude will incline you to seek out friendships and to seek out appreciative knowledge. And we call it the interfaith triangle. You can start anywhere on the triangle, and it kind of works as, to mix my shape metaphors here, works as a virtuous circle. So that's the kind of evaluation model we apply in our programs. It's super intuitive, right? But it's also easily measurable, right? So people walk out of an interfaith program and you can say, did you meet somebody from a different religion? Did you hear something inspiring about a different religion? Do you have a better attitude towards people of different religions? I think the other thing I would say is to just underscore the notion that the United States is the world's first religiously diverse democracy, and it's not nothing, right? The European founders, for all of their flaws, sins, and mistakes, these were people who were combatants, who were exponents of the combatants of the European wars of religion. So they are coming out of a centuries-long experience of Catholics and Protestants in mass murder campaigns against each other in Europe. Before that, against Muslims, and of course the Jewish population is constantly hounded and hated. And in the nation that they build, they imagine a place where people from different religions would not only be free and safe, but would work together, right? It's the dimension of identity that they came closest to getting right. It's a North Star that's still worth achieving. And perhaps it can serve as a model for other dimensions of identity. We would take what Washington, Jefferson, Adams, Madison, Franklin said about religious diversity in the late 18th century now. So when Washington says that the children of the stock of Abraham would sit in safety under their own vine and fig, let there be none to make them afraid. That's from Micah, by the way, from the Bible. I mean, you'd want to include Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, Baha'is, secular humanists, but that's pretty good for 1790. And it's a whole lot better than, some of the attitudes today, right? So living into the dream of being a healthy, religiously diverse democracy, and seeing if that could be a model for other dimensions of identity and diversity, I just think it's worth achieving, at least trying for.
Thank you, Eboo. We need to wrap. I want to acknowledge that we got one question we haven't answered from Matt Owens about how does telling more stories about bridges instead of divides square with the media's inclination to spend more time highlighting divides over bridges. I'd love to give you an opportunity to share in 30 seconds, a minute, last thoughts, and if you wanted to tackle the media thing as well, feel free.
Yeah. So I wake up every day, I think to myself, how do I tell better stories? Right? So if other people are going to tell stories about divides and I'm telling stories about bridging, I got to tell better stories. Right? And we live in there's never been a time in human history when ordinary people have had a better opportunity to be mass level storytellers. So it is my job, it is our job to tell them the most compelling story of bridge building, and for other people to say, hey, I want that, right? And look, I don't accuse me of being like an inveterate optimist. I will take that sling and arrow. But I'm a Muslim, and this is just like Quranic. And I also was in Chicago watching this dude who nobody could pronounce his name, and he rated an asterisk in his first name recognition survey in the Senate race, and he got trounced by 30 points by Bobby Rush in a congressional race in 2000. And the next thing I know, the dude's a senator and then he's president. And so, like, I have seen the impossible, right? I have seen the impossible, and why not do our part?
Eboo, thank you so much for joining us. Folks, you'll see a link in the chat to the book that's coming up in May. I want to make sure people didn't lose the announcement that Eboo made, that Interfaith Youth Core is changing its name to Interfaith America. And Eboo, good luck on the launch of the book, the renaming, and to all of us, good luck around your work with Congressman Kilmer and AmeriCorps. Thank you.
Thank you, friends. I appreciate the work you all do. Thank you for having me.